Adeloye decided he would attack. Lagos, after all, was being ruled by an inexperienced lad. But they were met by well-entrenched and well-positioned forces. Adeloye's army's defeat was nothing short of a disaster. There was no way back now, surely, right? This must be the end of the road. Far beyond the intrigues on the coast in the Yoruba hinterland, as we already know, the expansion of the Sokoto Caliphate had caused the collapse of the Oyo Empire. The Oyo people fled south and established new homes for themselves. In expanding southwards, the Oyo peoples of Ibadan, with assistance from Ife and help from the Ijebus on the coast, destroyed the homes of the Owus and ravaged over 150 Egba towns. The Owu, Egba and surrounding people fled further south until they arrived at Olumorok. There, they built a new city, a melting pot of several towns cooperating to ensure the survival. Abeokuta, as it came to be known, became a formidable fortress in itself. It was, however, far from the coast and needed access to the sea to import arms with which to defend itself. Its natural port should have been the Lagos Lagoon into which the River Ogun empties, but Lagos was allied with Ijebu, their mortal enemies. Between Badagry and Abeokuta were the Egbado peoples, who again were allied with the Ijebus and Ibadan. Abeokuta needed a port, and Badagry needed an ally, and the only thing in between them was a strip of hostile territory. So Abeokuta and Badagry parlayed up and attacked the Egbado towns and laid siege to Ota. Of course, Lagos and its king, Idewu, did not sit idle to watch this happen. They pitched their lot with the Egbado camp. The Lagos contingent was led by none other than King Idewu's brother, Kosoko. Nonetheless, Badagry and Abeokuta inflicted a traumatizing defeat on the Egbado-Lagos coalition. Thus, Adeloye ended up with a new ally and a new trading partner, and a little bit more. On one of several visits to Abeokuta, he became entangled with a certain influential and wealthy woman, Efunroye, Madame Tinubu. This defeat of Lagos by Abeokuta and Badagry was so bad that it marks the final straw in a long list of problems that the young King Idewu had been facing in Lagos. You see, he had been shedding supporters faster than a tree sheds leaves in Harmattan because he reportedly was a tight-fisted man and did not appreciate the concept of buying loyalty with wealth. He had also upset the king of Benin, his overlord, by refusing to pay regular tribute and deviating from tradition by not taking his father for burial in Benin. He had lost public support with this humiliating defeat, and he managed to estrange and isolate himself from all allies. So his chiefs petitioned the king of Benin, who responded by sending a messenger with a skull and a sword, asking Idewu to take his own life. Idewu had no choice but to commit suicide in 1835. For the second time in 6 years, the throne of Lagos lay vacant. Idewu was a king with no heirs, and the two main contenders for the throne were Adeloye, the exiled king in Badagry, and Idewu's younger brother, the handsome, popular, brash and braggadocious prince, Kosoko. Tradition tells us that Kosoko was a popular choice, which makes sense. No point as before in recalling Adeloye and thereby creating a new rivalry. Unfortunately, intrigue and this story go hand in hand, so you might have guessed that this will only get more complicated. Prince Kosoko of Lagos, a typical Yoruba demon type, rich, handsome and popular, but he had made an enemy of someone he really shouldn't have. The Eletu, if you remember him from before, was the head of the Akarigbiri class of chiefs. With Benin blood in his veins, he was the chief elector of Lagos kings and prime minister, the most important man in Lagos, second only to the king himself. So you can imagine the slight on his ego when Prince Kosoko, charmed, bedded and wedded, a beautiful damsel who was betrothed to him. Now the time had come to select a new king, and the Eletu rigged the decision of the oracle, blocking Kosoko from ascending the throne and instead inviting Adeloye from Badagry to be king. Finally, after over 2 decades of maneuvering, fighting and waiting, Adeloye was king once again, thanks to a love triangle that he knew nothing about. Kosoko was unhappy, but for all his assertiveness, he knew better than to challenge his wise and powerful uncle, Adeloye. So he waited with bated breath, licking his wounds and gradually building his influence. Adeloye had finally been reconciled with his long-lost throne, and perhaps with nothing more to live for, he promptly died after 2 years on the throne in 1837. Kosoko, despite being one of the most senior members of the royal family, was again sidestepped due to the influence of the Eletu and Madame Tinubu. Adeloye's son, Oluwole, was made king instead. It did not end here, however. The Eletu was not satisfied by merely preventing Kosoko from reigning as king. He needed to reduce him to nothing, So he began to go after Kosoko's family by accusing his sister of witchcraft, and although investigations proved that it was all a baseless lie, the Eletu still used his considerable influence to get her exiled and arranged to have her drowned. Kosoko was enraged to say the least, and he declared war on his cousin, the King Oluwole, and his prime minister, the Eletu. Kosoko's forces, commanded by Oshodi Tapa, eventually lost what is now known as the Ewekoko War, and he was banished from Lagos. Kosoko settled in Ouidah, where he befriended Brazilian slave traders. It all feels like multiple deja vus at this time, because that is exactly what his great-grandfather did. The Eletu, having succeeded in getting rid of his arch-enemy, decided to add one last flourish to complete Kosoko's humiliation. He ordered Kosoko's mother's bones be dug from a grave and cast unceremoniously into the Lagos Lagoon. If Kosoko had taken his woman, he would get back at him by killing and desecrating the most important women in his life. King Oluwole's reign was subsequently short and uninteresting. His death, however, was not. He died in what I describe as a freak accident. His body was blown to bits when a chance lightning strike hit the ammunition depot in the palace. His body was only identifiable by the royal beads that he wore. Village people would have sworn it was jazz. 1841 finds a beloved island in a remarkably familiar position. For the fourth time in 11 years, the throne of Lagos was again vacant. To be honest, I am surprised anyone still wanted to be king at this time. Anyways, the kingmakers met again, and once again the influence of the Eletu and Madam Tinubu's factions prevented the recall of Kosoko. The excuse tendered was that they were not sure of his whereabouts and whether he was alive or not. This time the throne was offered to the only available option, Akintoye. Akintoye was a younger son of Olunkutere and the younger brother of two previous kings, that is Oshiloku and Adeloye, and thus Kosoko's uncle. King Akintoye was the opposite of Kosoko. He was conciliatory, he was docile, and he was naive. No one is sure why, because no one but Akintoye thought it would be a good idea to invite his nephew Kosoko back to Lagos. Perhaps he genuinely wanted peace. But with the man thrice passed over for the throne you are currently occupying, whose sister was drowned by your prime minister, and whose mother's bones lay at the bottom of the Atlantic by the orders of the same man, never a good idea. Speaking of the Atlantic, remember how the British had outlawed trading in enslaved people in 1807 and completely outlawed the institution in 1833? Well, the year is now 1845 and they have positioned a squadron of warships along the coast of West Africa to capture any ships suspected of carrying enslaved peoples and to emancipate them. The squadron was also there to protect legitimate trade with British merchants like the trade in palm oil, ivory, gin and tobacco. With the end of slavery, black Africans were returning home to find their roots. Often they stopped at Sierra Leone before finding their way home. Many of them passed through Lagos and a good number of them settled in Abeokuta. Abeokuta had also welcomed many missionaries, for they saw them as potent links to the white man and therefore easy access to weapons, which was sorely needed, being largely surrounded by enemies. Anyways, back to Akintoye. He had pardoned and allowed his nephew Kosoko to return to Lagos by 1845, and he even granted him royal titles. Upon hearing of this, the Eletu decided to go on a self-imposed exile to Badagry, for he rightly surmised that both of them could not live in the same city. With Akintoye's most powerful ally, the Eletu, gone, Kosoko wasted no time in securing new alliances for himself, especially amongst the Hausa and Muslim community. His influence continued to grow despite opposition by the Madam Tinubu faction. Kosoko's power soon began to overshadow the king, and Akintoye, fearing a power grab, decided to recall his ally, the Eletu, from Badagry. Kosoko, now emboldened by his growing strength, threatened to depose the king if he did that. He did this through thinly veiled messages of contempt sung through the city by his personal town crier, to which King Akintoye would reply with his own songs through his own town crier, somewhat like traditional diss tracks, if you like. Some of the exchanges were reported to have thus gone. Kosoko's town crier went, "Tell that little child at court yonder to be careful, for if he's not careful, he will be punished." Bear in mind, he's calling his uncle a child. Ouch. Akintoye, not to be bested, replied with, "I am like a stake firmly driven into the ground, which is always hard to root out, but ever remains firm." It doesn't smack as hard, but it is stately and classy. Of course, Kosoko the swaggering prince would always want to have the last say. His town crier responded with, "I am the digger who always roots out the stake." Ballsy, right? In my opinion, Kosoko won the war of words, but he also drew first blood in the inevitable war that was to come. The Elito in Badagry had heard of the escalating tensions in Lagos, and he heeded his king's call to return. His entourage was however ambushed by Kosoko's men. Ever the brave soldier, the Elito fought his way through the thick of it, but he was eventually captured. That he would be killed was certain. All that was left to be determined was how gruesome it would be. Well, Kosoko directed the execution. The Elito was sealed in an empty palm oil barrel, which was then set alight and eventually thrown into the Lagos Lagoon. With the Elito dispatched, Kosoko embarked on a destructive war with Akintoye. For 3 weeks, Lagos was embroiled in pure carnage. Thousands fell on both sides, and half of the city was destroyed. The king Akintoye and his men were forced to retreat to the palace, where they quickly ran out of supplies and water. They were forced to drink the salty water of the lagoon, giving the war its name, the Saltwater War. On the 12th of August 1845, King Akintoye and what was left of his men fled via the waters and regrouped at Abeokuta, 90 miles north of Lagos. At last, wrote one missionary in recounting the story, Kosoko was the king of Lagos, but at what price and of what a place? Akintoye eventually left Abeokuta with an Ekpei escort to Badagry, and just like his brother Adeloye before him, he was able to fend off attempts at dislodging him from Badagry, where there was a considerable pro-Kosoko camp. Why does it feel like we've been here before? Oh, maybe because we have. Akintoye, already allied with the Ekpeis and the Hughes in Abeokuta, began to befriend the British merchants, missionaries, and the British consul for the Bights of Benin and Biafra, John Beecroft. Consul Beecroft had been tasked with ending slavery in the region once and for all. His first efforts were at Dahomey and his king, Gezo. The British offered to pay an annual pension equivalent to his yearly profits from slave trading if he would give up the illicit trade. This seemed a genuine and altruistic attempt at solving the problem of slavery. The crafty king of Dahomey rightly pointed out that the bulk of the slave trade was actually being carried out by Kosoko at Lagos, a coastal nation, and that he would lose clout with his military if he, a land nation, was forced to give up trading before a coastal nation. He was implying basically that giving up slave trade before Lagos would lead to a military takeover in his realm, which would cause instability in the region and interfere with British free trade and missionary work. Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowther, an influential West African cleric of Ekpei extraction, had personally informed the British Queen Victoria the slave trade in Lagos will be at an end if Lagos, its strongest supporter, was destroyed. Kosoko, on his part, was ramping up the slave trade, and he even sent his chiefs to Brazil to learn Portuguese and act as ambassadors. He owned slave ships and sent 3 of his sons, Simplicio, Lorenzo and Camilio, to a school in Bahia, Brazil. He did everything he could to frustrate the British and their agents by supporting Dahomey in its war against Abeokuta. Abeokuta at this point in time was the darling baby of the European missionaries and merchants. He did everything in his power to frustrate his uncle in Badagry as well. Akintoye, being hard-pressed by pro-Kosoko factions in Badagry, had no other option than to write to the British consul Beecroft. You can tell the desperation of his situation from the tone of his letter, which I shall now quote. "I need not tell you, sir, what a calamity it is for a king to be reduced to my distressful circumstances, and I am reduced to the necessity of begging your aid against an enemy who has seized my throne or my kingdom. My humble prayer to you, sir, the representative of the English government, is that you will take Lagos under your protection, that you will plant the English flag there, and you would re-establish me on my rightful throne at Lagos and protect me under my flag. And with your help, I promise to enter into a treaty with England to abolish slave trade at Lagos and to establish and carry on lawful trade, especially with the English merchants." Badagry was becoming too volatile for Akintoye to remain there. He was thus spirited away by the British Navy to Fernando Po, whilst Badagry and Abeokuta were under constant attacks from Dahomey and Lagos. So Abeokuta also joined the voices asking for intervention in Lagos. Their leaders wrote, "At present, Badagry is the only medium of communication between the English and Abeokuta, as Lagos was still under the administration of Kosoko, who is an enemy to both Abeokuta and the English. We get our ammunitions and other useful articles from Badagry, and Kosoko is too penetrating as to not perceive such advantages. He is therefore labouring to cut off all intercourse between the English and Abeokuta." By now the entire sub-region was becoming rather volatile. Free trade was closing off. Everyone was stockpiling arms. War, again, was inevitable. But this time, there would be new players in the game. Very big players at that too.